We're going to move into our third set of presentations, and we're going to have KP. So let me introduce KP. We okay?
I get trapped by the armrest. Not weird. It happens.
Do we still have our Zoom people, or did they
We have
took off?
4
All
folks
right.
here.
KP, which stands for Kuya Paul.
Just KP.
KP.
Rebranding process.
Oh,
He,
I'm gonna use that.
he listens to his friends.
No, the K stands for a lot of.
Oh.
Okay, so Paul Abesamis is a Los Angeles-based spoken word artist, poet, and performer. He has performed in such venues as the World Stage, Epayola, and the Asian American International Film Festival. He has a book. And actually, Pastor Matt Amargo, who was with us this morning, told me, hey, I think I have that guy's book.
Nice.
I said, seriously? What? So he does. And he is currently also pursuing his Master's of Theology here at Fuller Theological Seminary. So, KP, floor is yours.
Hey.
Give me a second. I'm a little injured. All right. I think I'm okay. Let me get your pouch.
I'm all right. Just
You
gotta.
want the big stool?
Do you need the?
In a chair?
Yeah.
I might need. I'm just gonna use.
Just get the chair. No,
Oh, just to sit down in it? Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Man. You go. Well, I'm just gonna lean on it
Do you want to boost?
because this
We're not gonna put you.
so much. I feel seen and supported. Huh? Did I make it? I made it. I made it over here. Hi everyone. Yeah, so yeah, this is my presentation called Purity Cult. And I was so the talk is about basically the idea of purity culture and its influence within the millennial FilAm experience. I will get more into it from there. But I want to start actually with the first slide. Just to kind of give credence to where I'm coming from. First is I don't want to say that I'm an expert on purity culture. I've definitely lived through it. But at the same time, it's just, oh, the first slide is done. Okay, it's okay. But I have a lived experience within it as a former minister, youth minister, coming into the whole I would say maybe about 20, almost 30 years of lived in purity culture, but I'm definitely not an expert. So I'm going to be approaching this in my own particular lens. Firstly, second generation Filipino American. Also, my church traditions are many Pentecostal charismatic churches, which I did see pretty rampant in terms of purity culture. So with that, also youth and young adult minister. So definitely ministering to kind of the mid and post millennial generations, as I'm what I guess can be considered a elder millennial, almost Gen Xer. So I'm coming from that place as well too. I'm also coming as a cisgender male, and I'm also coming as a theology student, and also coming in as a poet, performer, and artist. That will kind of come in later as I peer through this particular topic in a kind of a particular lens of what I see and how we can kind of like compare our own journey and formation through it. So what is the purity movement? Before I actually get there, there's another slide that's actually gonna show what we're gonna be doing today. So today we're actually gonna have the agenda first of defining purity culture, also the Filipino American experience within that, its relation to suffering, since that's what we are talking about today. And we're gonna be doing what I am basically framing as a virtual case study. And after that, a pathway forward. And once again, this is just, oh, okay. But once again, this is just a kind of a light framework. I don't really come in again as an expert of purity culture and the subject and the topic. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this was I was definitely encouraged during one of our formation meets that's like, oh, hey, if you talk about this, I'm sure a lot of people will want to talk with you about it. And I was like, I think we do need to start having that conversation as well too. So I was very encouraged to pursue this topic in that regard. So a lot of it will be a little bit like bottleneck and narrow in terms of purity culture because it's such a big topic. And we can be here for days talking about it, talking about our own experiences. But we'll try to bottleneck it today. And in doing so, we will start with the first thing, which would be actually having kind of a definition of our talk today about purity culture. And I'm using this quote in terms of the purity movement. So purity culture has become the term used for the evangelical movement that promotes a biblical view of sexual purity by requiring strict adherence to sexual abstinence before marriage, supporting only heterosexual, married, and monogamous forms of sexual activity. So again, we're just kind of narrowing it to most romantic forms of what purity culture would be and would be within the church. I chose these somewhat notable characters. You might know at least one or two of them. I didn't really know too much about True Love Waits, but I did hear about the movement. We had certain forms of the movement. I believe ours, like in the West Coast, was the Love Revolution. But they did actually have that quote. I can't really read it from here, but basically it's quoting this whole idea that I will save myself for marriage, that I'll save myself for the one person. So just kind of keeping away from anything that might deflect me from actually having that one relationship with that one person for the rest of my life. But they would actually quote that true love waits a saying. And then after, you might know, if you've had kind of the same lived experience, they'll give you a little like ring or something that you can kind of like wear and whatever. It's like, this is my promise, this is my covenants. I had a key. We got a purity key, and it's an uncut. Anyway. So you get an uncut key, and then the key, you don't cut it until you get married, and it's supposed to be. Oh man, it was so hard. Because we actually had a youth pastor that said, oh, our first apartment was the first time I cut the key. I was like, that is so hard. Like to do anyway. So I'm going to get through more of that, but it's just like, wow, that's like so specific. But everyone had their own little thing. And also another guy, I hate this guy, Joshua Harris, 1997, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Oh man. And then a little bit about Joshua Harris as well too. He was in his very early 20s when he wrote the book about this idea of basically like, well, let's just trust in God with everything there is for our relationship. So let's not date and let's not do anything else. Let's just kind of keep this pure relationship and then just like act on a prayer that, relationship will just blossom because God allowed it. But because of that, because this whole idea of purity and the removal of intimacy, after more than 20 years, he's actually renounced. He's gotten a divorce, and the whole other basket case of all the things that he's doing with non-purity culture now as well too. But yeah, he was definitely one of the proponents of it. So what with the Filipino American is part of this experience. And so the whole idea of the relationship of purity and the Filipino American, there's three things that I've seen in talking to people around me, ministry, also family, that saw the whole idea of the purity movement as being like very central, or at least connecting to the Filipino American experience. Three things kind of came to mind. The first one was the tradition of Catholicism. I actually get this idea from a lot of like parents. My dad would actually say this as well too, that there was a very big connection with is like, well, we practice this idea of purity already, just like being raised either Catholic, my dad is a Methodist, and then there was this already idea of just being pure. So I wrote Migrant Ideology Seeks to Wrestle Control from Outside Change. As they migrated over here, raising their own family, it's like, well, we need to adopt something that will keep our kids protected from all the temptations that they might go through. So the idea of their previous religions, faith, that was a very good connecting point. It's like, well, yeah, purity culture basically imitates that. Second thing would be it aligns with the courtship culture of the Filipino. So this whole idea that it had like synonymous goals, synonymous practices, the idea of courtship, of like you're only pursuing one person and you're dedicating yourself to this one person because you're in love with them, was very synonymous with what purity culture also sought to dictate within relationships. So there were certain synonymous practices within that. And then the last would be, it was very fashionable for millennials to trend towards purity. And it was a very celebrity popular status within certain circles. Not everyone actually saw it that way, but there was a certain popularity when you can sport your purity ring or you sport your purity whatever object that your church gave you. And it's like, yeah, I'm the one that supports it. So it was somewhat of a rock star status, especially within the late 90s. And then more or less to prove that, there were certain notable stars that actually found that you may know that also was very highly vocal proponents of this, such as, if you know them, Nick Jonas, Miley Cyrus, Britney Spears, Selena Gomez, Demi Lovato, a lot of them coming from Disney that will come in a little bit later within the presentation, just hinting at the fact that something might happen. But basically like, yeah. So yeah, these Disney stars are just like very proponents of like, yeah, but I'm also keeping a very pure life. And many of them, yeah, and some of them, maybe questionable. We're getting to that part. So within the next slide, we actually talk about, especially with the idea of what we're talking about today. So what does purity culture and this idea have to do with suffering? So in terms of suffering, there's one big proponent was the whole idea that it was a doctrine of shame. So it was a religious practice of purity that disembodied believers from their own emotions, desires, and relationships for for the sake of escaping this idea of sinful temptation. So though one of the biggest practices of purity was to be without certain experiences, because those experiences would lead to more or greater experiences and temptations that would ultimately lead to sin and uncleanliness and ungodliness. One example that I use is I went to a purity seminar, and the person that was teaching it, she used this whole idea of a ladder, and then within the rungs of the ladder was this point of no return, and the point of no return was kissing. It's like, well, if you kiss, that's it. Then you'll never get back anywhere from kissing. So it's like, if you start kissing in this relationship, if that doesn't work out, well, then your next relationship, you'll start immediately on kissing because nothing else will feel as intimate as kissing. And then there was this whole like point of no return. So there was kind of a fear-based mongering of just like, well, if you go here, you'll never return from. There was no redemption to it. There was more just like, once you get over here, it's over. So that's why it was a very big proponent of like, don't even hint at these ideas, because once you hint at these ideas, then you have no redemption from it. It was also a removal of the relational or spiritual or spirit-led Missio Dei in lieu of a religious connection to God, and then promoted godliness through works. So things like abstinence, non-dating, no physical relations. A big verse was Ephesians 5:3, not even a hint of sexual immorality, and so on and so forth. And then once again, Joshua Harris, I hate that guy, but like he would just be like, you don't even want a hint of it. You don't even want a little tiny bit of it, because if you do, it's just over for you. So it was, but it became a practice of like, well, if I kept a pure life, that means I'm pleasing God from my pure life, because I never have these experiences that lead to temptation and sin. Now for the Filipino though, the way that it affected the Filipino in terms of suffering was one, it was a removal, a disregard, even a vilifying of certain like traditions and that Filipinos were very proud of. Things that promoted intimacy, and you might have heard this from like I don't know, your titas or titos, but like things like letter writing or the balag, the spoken word, the harana. My pastor would even still do it, like have like just serenades. And I'm gonna say this word wrong. Paninil bihan or access service. Yeah, but these practices, these Filipino practices that within the previous generation really loved and adored. There were intimate practices that's in the guise of purity culture were now seen as almost demonized because it promoted intimacy, and intimacy will lead to temptation, and temptation lead to, once again, like it did not promote there was not an intimate lifestyle in it because purity culture would keep you from those temptations. And also there was this whole generational practice that I started seeing as a minister of from the shadows, I called it. And then I quote myself saying, it's like, if I can't do it in public, I'll practice it in secret. One thing that I saw from previous generations, I don't necessarily know it within my family, but I've seen and heard it. It's almost as, not, I don't want to say stereotype, but it's almost a running joke that, you know, like you go to like a Filipino funeral and then that's where you find like the 5 or 6 other families that the guy had. Like, so, but because there's no divorce in the Philippines. So if I can't do it publicly, I will find a way to do it privately. As a minister, especially a youth and young adult minister, I saw this a lot more prevalent within the Filipino American experience, because if I can't date this boy publicly, then I'll have sex with him privately. And then that's when you have all these, you know, like prayer meetings, like, did you know so-and-so, going back to Martes, like, did you know so-and-so is pregnant 3 months, blah, blah, blah. But it's all in private, it's all in secret, and they try to cover it all up because they don't have they don't have the agency to talk about it in public. So they just keep it secret. This also affected in terms of hiding things like gender affirmation. Like if they had questions about gender and sexuality, they didn't talk about it. They just kept it secret, and they ended up living double lives. So to continue and to kind of get a little bit more of an idea of maybe how our millennial experience, at least if you see yourself as a millennial, how we can kind of relate to it and see maybe where we fall upon it or relate in terms of our experience. I wanted to use this idea of a phoropter, which I kind of get from one of my classes, Theology and Culture from Carter Calloway. Using the a phoropter is that thing that the optometrist sticks on you to like try to get like your lenses. So you probably know it's a big whole thing, and then it gives you different lenses so you can see clear. So I call this a virtual case study, and I forgot I had a music cue, but oh well, never mind. And yeah, I promise I won't sing anything from it. But next slide, I decided to use this movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And yeah, well, see, I didn't have to sing it, just like everyone sing it. So, okay. So why am I going to be using this movie as kind of a virtual case study? Well, a couple of things that I thought was very interesting. Hunchback of Notre Dame was actually released in 1996. This is around the same time that purity culture was kind of at its peak. So it had a very interesting reflection of purity in and of itself within the movie, and it is a reflection of culture, at least then. Even though the original story of the Hunchback of Notre Dame was from, I believe it was Victor Hugo, but this is a very interesting time because it is culture itself during the same time that this is all happening, reflecting on this idea of purity and what it may do both for good and definitely for ill. And another thing is it gives us a good street view of its concerns. So instead of looking at it as like this big broad level, perhaps we can look at it on kind of on a street view, one-on-one, maybe where we can relate to it a bit more closely and clearly. There are going to be particular characters that highlight different contexts of the film millennial experience. So I'll be using some of the characters that if you've seen the movie, you can probably more relate to. It's like, oh yeah, I'm kind of like that guy, or oh, I remember I had a very, very particular experience, the same as this character did within the movie. And then I do have like the little premise that this is not really saying that this is an end all be all list of this is exactly what happened within this time within the purity millennial experience, but perhaps it can start branching out into all the different things that may have happened. So again, you're just using this as a example case study. So the first character that we are going to go with is the proselytes. So proselyte, yeah. But yeah, for the sake of like Disney copyright, I'm not going to say his actual name. So the proselyte, the way that I described the proselyte during this time of purity culture, it was a sex-obsessed culture of chastity. The proselytes would promote heteronormative relations. There was no redemption without the constant practice. So proselyte itself would just be, this is the way that I keep connected to God, by keeping pure. And because of my religious practice of this is the way that I connect with God. There's a certain overcompensation of physical and emotional control as an act of godly service. So once again, it's just everything that I do physically, everything that I sacrifice is an act of service unto God. For the Filipino American, from the outside, if we're being persecuted from the proselyte, it's this idea of creating a colorblind ideology that erases racial difference and it promotes inequality. So it kind of amalgamizes everything, especially within that sense. If you are a Filipino American, you kind of lose your identity because you have to keep to this amalgamated, sterilized version of your own faith. So you lose yourself in the process. And then as a practicing proselyte, from the inside, it dismantles the table of communion. So not all are welcome, and erases kapwa. It erases the connection that we have with other people. So as certain proselytes that I had worked with, they had very little to do with outside communities. It was very hard for them to witness towards the gospel because there was a very big wall that they set up for themselves, saying, well, you have to be this, you have to be poor, you have to be pure, you have to set yourself up this way in terms of purity, so that they were only maybe very effective within their own church, but actually witnessing to the outside community, they were no good and effective because they weren't inviting. They were already putting up walls because of their own practices of purity. So the second would be the hero. So the hero is unaffected by purity culture stigmas, they are in wonder of its negative effects with colleagues. The way that I describe it is, well, purity culture worked for me. Why doesn't it work for you guys? Like, I found my husband, quote unquote, I found my wife like during purity culture. How come it's not working for you? Like, how come you're struggling? So there's a very like disconnect of, it's like, yeah, like purity culture is great. And I got this a little bit with some close friends, some family, where it's just like, no, I don't understand. Why are you talking? Okay. I talked to some of my family members and they're just like, I don't know why are you talking about purity culture? Purity culture is great. Purity culture is good. We should continue to do this idea of purity culture. It's like, well, that's because you are so within that whole microcosm of what purity culture was within your own church, within the church. We went and a lot of times we went to a very Filipino American church. So there was no cross-cultural, multicultural events that would compete both with our culture, our race, our faith. So there was no conflict. So purity culture within that microcosm would work. So there was also this whole celebrity success stories. It's like, oh, so-and-so, she prayed and blah, and then she found her husband. It's like, if she can do it, then I can do it. Oh, if he can wait all this time and then happen, then it also happened to me. But then there's that disconnect, because even if it happened to them, that relation that maybe you're not living the same story or the same context. There's a misunderstanding of just like, well, like it happened to me. So I'm the hero of my story. How come you can't be the hero of yours? Within the Filipino American context, there can be those generational gaps. I say it this way, raising a Gen Alpha in a sterile environment. I do see this right now in some of my like family, where it's just like, well, purity culture worked for me, and I'm afraid that even if it worked for me, will it work for my kids? So it promotes this very sterile environment. It's like, well, I have to continue to keep them more and more and more pure. There's building up of this protection aspect. And I just call it like this whole saran wrap community. It's like if I keep wrapping them in this purity, because it worked in my context, then I don't have to have them actually like touch air and get corrupted. But there's also this idea of the danger of exploration. I've been in this bubble so long, I don't know if I can leave this bubble and actually live and actually be human, because this bubble has worked for me for so long that I don't know what might happen to me if I escape it. And then there's, I'm going to give Denise props for this because she gave me the word for it. But the next one is the exotic. I can almost make you like do this whole slide. Anyway, but they are seen as vulnerable and in need of protection, or sinful and susceptible to sin. So there is a strong female perspective. It's not exclusively female, but there is definitely a strong female perspective within the idea of the exotic. So all actions must maintain sterile. So everything that they do is maintain sterile because their identity is actually very founded on their purity. So any kind of dirtiness or uncleanness and ungodliness actually corrupts them within the community itself. So failed actions or struggling actions in purity promotes a spiraling action, either of over-sexualized conduct or extreme social chastity. So what I mean by that is their over-sexualization, if they fail to be pure, is that, well, I'm dirty already, I might as well continue to stay dirty, and then just and then basically give up on their reconciliation between them and God. Or there's this doubling down. It's like, well, no, I don't ever want to be pure again, but then it also keeps you away from connection, keeps you from relationship, and then keeps you from God in that sense, just because it becomes a practice. And once again, the FilAm perspective, it's this idea of exotic. Again, thanks Denise for that. It becomes this non-white narrative of impurity. That's because there's a very contextualized, perhaps even colonial mentality that I actually just physically don't look pure because you're not white, because you're not a lighter skin tone. You're automatically seen as you're more susceptible to impurity just because you're not front facing pure in some people's eyes. There's also this idea, and this is a bit of a trigger warning. This is a bit of a trigger warning with this last thing, but the idea of conquest narratives. That no,
Sorry.
one more, no, it's okay, it's fine. But it's just this conquest narrative that promotes, again, it's a little triggering, but it's a promotion of sexual abuse within the culture as well too. And it's not an easy thing to say, but basically it's just people will look to see, it's like, well, only as an example, so this becomes more clear, but it's like, oh, my partner who sees themselves as pure is always going to stay pure, but I want to explore and I want to be more creative. So I'm going to go to this person who probably is not pure. And I'm going to go to them. And of course, because they're not looking pure, they're impure, they'll definitely want to be more experimental with me. But it promotes this idea that can lead into sexual abuse and far worse things as well too. And then the last is the deformed. It's this ostracization of community due to a personal belief of social deformity. It's fueled by this ideology of colonizer mentality. It's obstructing questions of sexuality, gender affirmation. It's this whole idea of secret life. Once again, that's I'm already not welcome within this community, so I'm just going to ostracize myself from this community and live this double life as well too. So from all these things, I just wanted to end it with this whole idea that there can be hope from next slide, sorry. There can be hope from this. I'm not offering an answer, but I'm just offering perhaps like like this idea of a hope towards our future. And I'm reminded of the passage of Luke 4 where Christ reads from the scroll of Isaiah, where he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery for sight of the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And the idea of reading that verse in a purity perspective is like, oh, well, then I need to be persecuted. I need to be oppressed. I need to not be free. But it is actually more perhaps an invitation that's wherever you are, God is coming for redemption, not because you have put yourself in a place of purity, but because God wants to redeem you to actually have relationship. And I just wanted to end once again with this movie. It has a very interesting song. I'm not going to sing it, but it does have this very interesting song called "God Help the Outcasts." And then just reading it feels like somewhat of a prayer of hope for the community who have gone through and suffered through purity culture. So the last slide, please. And then the last slide would say, I ask for nothing. I can get by, but I know so many less lucky than I. Please help my people, the poor and downtrodden. I thought we all were the children of God. God help the outcasts, children of God. So yeah, that's my presentation.
Thank you. Got time for about 5 minutes of questions or responses to what KP shared. And probably have a lot of conversation with him when we're done for the day.
KP, thanks for opening up the discussion. I think, talking to regarding the FilAm conference that you were serving, one of the things that you did bring up was like, well, can't do it in public, so practice in secret. And since you did work with, youth, young adults and stuff, one of the things that is talked about that's like exploding is just like porn and secret use in terms of church. Not sure if you kind of speak, because I think you shared a lot about the relationships that happen in secret, but also kind of different practices or outlets that, might also, heard or seen or something like that within the context that you've kind of like served in. So, yeah.
I don't really have so much, again, like an answer for it. I think it's the active conversation. So when I was doing like youth and young adult ministry, it was more the invitation to talk about it instead of like keeping it in secret. And it was also the conversation of, I guess I would say it this way. It's like, so even with my youth, I was just like, hey guys, look, I'm not stupid. Like, I know that like before this, after this, you guys are doing stuff that I can't stop you doing, but I don't mind even just talking about it and then like putting it within the conversation and kind of bringing it to light, not for shame, but for a conversation. I even remember like having some of my friends who are now colleagues, but I used to be like their minister, like they would even tell me all this stuff that they used to do right before youth ministry. I was like, you did that? It's like, oh yeah, we did that. It's like, well, I mean, okay, I'm not surprised. But yeah, again, I also wish that we talked about it. So you didn't have to necessarily hide your feelings, your emotions, but at least we could have a conversation.
You mentioned about the Assemblies of God, as part of your background. I grew up as an Assemblies of God, not part of it anymore, but I grew up as an Assemblies of God, and I remember that during the culture break. So I don't know if, can we say, because many of the first generation Filipinos who came here to become pastors, right? They were not, like, they didn't receive like, quality theological education. So I'm wondering if part of the problem here, why the purity culture flourished in the Assemblies of God, FilAm Assemblies of God churches, is that has something to do with the kind of intellectual culture that is naive, right? Classless in a way, right? I don't know. I'm not trying to be arrogant here, right? I'm asking this question, but there's some element of that first generation Assemblies of God pastors, right? Given the lack of quality theological education that they brought into the intellectual culture of the church, right? And I think that's paved the way for purity culture to somehow flourish among the Assemblies of God. I don't know if I'm making sense here.
Yeah, with my experience, a lot of the activity, like the whole secrecy of it was, there was a huge assumption. I can go through, but how do I sum this up? I think when you say the lack of like the theological education, I think a lot of what I experienced as a minister, a FilAm minister who was under Filipino pastors, first generation Filipino pastors in AG, my critique was there was a huge lack of cultural and sociological sensitivity. Like they're coming in expecting, well, these kids are Filipino. It's like, no, they're Filipino American. They're not Filipino. Like they're not in your province. They live 30 miles away. There's differences within that culture. They don't see the same culture going on in their schools, in their own lives, in their personal life. So because of that, there was no there was more of an assumption that whatever I say they will follow. It's like, no, you have to convince them. Because they're muddling through their identity even right now. It is not an identity that they share with the rest of the nation. They're slowly integrating themselves within a nation. That I'm just gonna sum it up because I can go on forever with that topic. But yeah, it's the whole integration of that and the lack of knowledge, and dare I say the lack of care for even thinking. It's like, well, no, they go to my church, so we're just going to be a Filipino church. I'm like, you're going to have a problem. Yeah, because you're not recognizing that there is different culture going on within the Filipino American context.
We thank you, Pete.
Oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. I just made it so awkward. I just, when we first had a conversation about this presentation, I was taking a walk and I started crying and I was like, there's so much here. Because for so many people in our generation, even after marriage, like I have friends, we have a group of people we've just talked about, like we still struggle because of what purity culture did to our bodies and how it labeled our bodies, and so that's just been something as I'm parenting and as my kids are getting older. Like my oldest is in middle school now, and like you mentioned Gen Alpha and like the saran wrap parenting, and I have thankfully within my friend group, and maybe because I've like curated my friend group very well now at this point, but we're having the conversations. And all of these conversations, because it's not one singular conversation with a kid about sex, it is an ongoing conversation that like often gets weird. But like the first thing we start with is consent, and we're very deliberate about that. And so, so there are like, I'm encouraged by the conversations that are being had. I'm encouraged that like a presentation is in a public space for this. And I just think that like we can continue this conversation. I'm excited about it.
Let's thank KP again.
Yes.
Don't be sorry. Having this presentation is yours.
Yeah, don't be sorry about that. I think that's super, super important. And those of us who are trying to raise Gen Alpha kids,
Yeah.
oh boy. Tim. Yeah, we really have to unpack and unlearn some things
For sure.
as we seek to learn new things that would hopefully break cycles, right? So thanks, KP. There's a lot to talk about there, but I appreciate that very much. I'm going to introduce Jen before we give her the floor.